Rome, 1972. The Colosseum Film Studios on Via Tuscolana, a closed soundstage holding what most would never witness, 5 crew members, 2 legends, and 90s that would be whispered about for decades. Chuck Norris stood at the edge of the mat, 6 feet tall, 170 pounds of coiled precision, 32 years old. World Karate Champion, 6-time undefeated title holder. He wore simple training clothes, black cotton pants, a white t-shirt darkened with sweat at the collar. His jaw was set. His hands hung loose at his sides, but his fingers twitched slightly. Anticipation or doubt? Across from him, Bruce Lee stretched 5'7", 135 pounds. 31 years old, he wore his trademark yellow tracksuit, the one that would become iconic in films yet to be released. The fabric rustled as he moved through a fluid sequence, neck rolls, shoulder rotations, a sudden explosive snap kick that stopped inches from an invisible target. The sound cut through the thick Roman heat like a blade through silk. The soundstage was cavernous, 40 feet high, equipment scattered everywhere, cameras wrapped in protective cloth, lighting rigs hanging from steel beams, coiled cables snaking across the concrete floor. The air smelled of dust, machine oil, and the faint metallic tang of electrical equipment that had been running hot all day. Outside, the late afternoon sun baked the cobblestones. Inside, the temperature climbed past 90 degrees. No air conditioning, just 2 industrial fans that barely moved the heavy air. They were filming Way of the Dragon, Bruce's directorial debut, the movie that would feature their choreographed fight in the Colosseum, a sequence that would be studied, analyzed, replicated for generations. But that was for the cameras. That was for the world. This was different. The 5 crew members present had been sworn to silence, not through threats, through understanding. What they were about to witness wasn't end for public consumption. It wasn't for promotional material. It wasn't about egos or bragging rights. It was about truth. The cinematographer, a lean Italian man named Giuseppe, stood near the wall, arms crossed. Beside him, 2 lighting technicians, both Chinese, both from Hong Kong, both utterly still. A production assistant, barely 20, held a clipboard but wasn't writing anything. And the fight coordinator, a wiry Taiwanese martial artist named Chen, stood closest to the mat, his eyes narrow, calculating. Giuseppe would later say the air felt electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. Chuck broke the silence first. His voice was measured, respectful, but there was steel underneath. "Bruce, I need to know." Bruce stopped stretching. Turned. His eyes were dark, intense, impossible to read. "Know what? If what they say is true." "They say a lot of things." Chuck stepped onto the mat. The rubber surface was thin, laid over concrete, still warm from the day's filming. "They say you're the fastest. They say you can hit before your opponent sees the movement. They say you can intercept a strike mid-motion and counter before it lands." Bruce tilted his head slightly. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Not arrogant, curious. And you want to test this? I need to know where I stand. I've fought everyone in my division. I've won every tournament, but I've never faced—" He paused. Chose his words carefully. "I've never faced someone who approaches combat the way you do." The room held its breath. Bruce walked onto the mat, stood 15 feet from Chuck. "This isn't about tournament rules," he said quietly. "No points, no judges, no rounds. I understand. Then what are the parameters?" Chuck's jaw tightened. "We go until one of us signals stop, or until one of us can't continue." Giuseppe shifted his weight. The production assistant's hand trembled slightly against the clipboard. Chen's expression remained neutral, but his fingers curled into loose fists. Bruce studied Chuck for a long moment, reading him. Not his stance or his positioning. Those were obvious, professional, textbook perfect. Reading something deeper, intention, commitment. Finally, Bruce nodded. 90 seconds. What's 90 seconds? That's all we need. Chuck felt something cold settle in his stomach. 90 seconds. In tournament fighting, rounds lasted 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Matches could go 10, 15 minutes. 90 seconds felt like an insult. Bruce saw the reaction. Continued speaking, voice calm, almost gentle. In a real fight, most encounters are decided in the first 10 to 15 seconds. 90 seconds is generous. 90 seconds will tell you everything you need to know. He turned to Chen. "Time us." Chen pulled a stopwatch from his pocket, held it up on your signal. Bruce and Chuck faced each other. 15 feet of distance, 90 degrees of heat, 5 witnesses, 2 very different approaches to the same art. Chuck settled into his stance. Classical karate weight, balanced, center of gravity low, hands positioned for both defense and attack. His breathing slowed, controlled. This was familiar territory. This was everything he'd trained for since he was 18 years old. Bruce stood almost casually, feet shoulder-width apart, hands loose, no recognizable stance. His weight shifted constantly, never settling, like water refusing to be still. His eyes never left Chuck's center mass. Not his hands, not his feet, the core where all movement originated. Ready, Tuck Chen's voice. Chuck nodded. Bruce said nothing, didn't need to. Begin and for the first 5 seconds, neither moved. Chen had told himself he'd watch the timer. His eyes never left the fighters. Chuck stepped forward, tested distance, measured. His lead hand extended slightly, a probe, a question. Bruce's response was so minimal, it barely qualified as movement. A shift, a subtle rotation. His centerline changed angles. Suddenly Chuck's probing hand was aimed at empty space. Chuck adjusted, stepped again, committed this time, a straight punch, fast, precise, championship-level speed, his fist cut through the air with a sharp whisper. Bruce's hand rose. Intercepted? Not blocking. Intercepting. His forearm met Chuck's wrist before the punch reached full extension, redirected it, and in the same motion, Bruce's other hand snapped forward in a short, sharp strike aimed at Chuck's ribs. Chuck twisted, blocked. But barely. The speed was shocking. Not superhuman, not impossible, but refined to a degree that eliminated wasted motion, every millimeter calculated, every microsecond optimized. They separated, reset, 20 seconds elapsed. Chuck came in again. Higher commitment, a combination, jab, cross, low kick, tournament-winning technique, the kind of sequence that had earned him 6 consecutive world titles. Bruce moved through it like smoke through a chain-link fence. The jab missed by inches. He'd shifted his head, minimal movement, maximum efficiency. The cross met his deflecting forearm, not hard blocking, soft redirecting. The low kick found air. Bruce had pulled his lead leg back, changed levels, simultaneously closing distance while evading the strike. And then Bruce was inside Chuck's guard, chest-to-chest distance. His fist stopped 3 inches from Chuck's jaw, hung there, perfectly positioned, perfectly controlled. He didn't throw it. They separated again. Chuck's breathing had changed faster, deeper, 45 seconds. Giuseppe pressed his back against the wall. He'd seen thousands of fight scenes, choreographed, rehearsed, safe. This was different. This was 2 men operating at the absolute edge of human capability, neither trying to hurt the other, both trying to understand something fundamental about combat itself. Chuck came in again, more aggressive now. A flurry, punches, elbows, knees, the kind of overwhelming attack designed to break through any defense through sheer volume. His hands and feet were a blur. The sound of displaced air filled the soundstage. The industrial fans couldn't keep up with the heat his body generated. Bruce weathered it, deflected what he could, evaded what he couldn't deflect, absorbed what he couldn't evade, and between each of Chuck's attacks, in the microscopic gaps where one technique ended and deep another began, Bruce countered. Lightning-fast strikes that stopped just short of contact. Not taps, not light touches. Full-power strikes arrested at the last possible microsecond. To Chuck's throat, to his solar plexus, to his floating ribs, to pressure points that would drop a man instantly. Each one stopped, each one controlled, each one a message. I could, but I won't. 60 seconds. Chuck backed off, breathing hard now. Sweat ran down his temples, dripped from his chin. His t-shirt clung to his chest. He could feel his heart hammering. Not from exhaustion, from something else. Something that felt dangerously close to fear. No, not fear, awe. Bruce's breathing hadn't changed. Still steady, still controlled. His tracksuit had dark patches under the arms, but his face remained calm, almost meditative. He wasn't fighting Chuck. He was having a conversation, a dialogue conducted through movement, timing, distance, pressure. And Chuck was beginning to understand the language. 30 seconds, Chen said quietly. Chuck came in one more time. This time different. Not attacking to win, attacking to learn. He threw a high roundhouse kick, full power, full speed, the kind that had knocked out opponents in the ring. Bruce didn't evade, didn't deflect. He stepped into it, jammed the kick before it could develop power, got inside the arc, too close for the technique to work, and in that moment of Chuck's imbalance, Bruce demonstrated something that would be burned into Chuck Norris's memory forever. He tapped Chuck's shoulder, his hip, his knee, his ankle. 4 touches in less than a second, each one a strike point, each one a potential fight ender, shoulder for dislocation, hip for nerve cluster, knee for structural collapse, ankle for complete immobilization. 4 touches, 1 second, game over. They separated. Bruce took 3 steps back, gave Chuck space. Time, Chen said. His voice cracked slight 90 seconds exactly. Chuck stood there, hands on his knees, breathing hard, sweat dripping onto the mat. He looked up at Bruce, who stood perfectly still, perfectly balanced, perfectly calm. "You okay?" Bruce asked, genuine concern in his voice. Chuck straightened, wiped his face, looked at Bruce for a long moment. Then he did something that none of the 5 crew members expected. He bowed deep, the kind of bow reserved for masters, the kind that acknowledged not just skill but wisdom. When he straightened, his eyes were wet, not from pain, from revelation. "I train every day," Chuck said. His voice was hoarse. 6 hours, sometimes 8, forms combinations, sparring, conditioning. I've done this since I was 18. 14 years. I thought I understood speed. I thought I understood timing. Bruce said nothing, waited. "I don't know anything," Chuck finished. His shoulders sagged. Not in defeat, in liberation. The kind that comes when you realize how much there is still to learn. When the mountain you thought you had climbed reveals itself as merely the first foothill. Bruce walked forward, placed his hand on Chuck's shoulder. "You know plenty. Your technique is excellent, your power is real, your discipline is obvious. Then why?" "Because you're still fighting in the tournament," Bruce said gently. "You're fighting for points, for judges, for rules. I'm not saying that's wrong. It's made you a champion, but it's not the same as fighting for truth. On truth." Bruce squeezed Chuck's shoulder. "In a real fight, there are no rounds, no rest periods, no officials to separate you when it gets dangerous. There's only what works and what doesn't. And what works isn't always the most powerful technique or the fastest strike. It's the one that arrives when your opponent isn't ready, the one that creates opportunity instead of trying to force." Through defense, Chuck looked at the floor, processing, integrating. Everything he thought he knew was being restructured, not torn down. Restructured, like a house being renovated. The foundation was sound, but the rooms needed rearranging. "I want to learn," he said quietly. "I need to learn." Bruce smiled. Warm, genuine. "You just did. That's the first step, knowing what you don't know. Most people never get there. They think winning tournaments means they've mastered the art. You just realize the art is bigger than tournaments. That alone puts you ahead of 99% of martial artists." He turned to Chen. "We're good, thank you." Chen nodded, pocketed the stopwatch. The 2 lighting technicians exhaled simultaneously. Giuseppe uncrossed his arms. The production assistant set down the clipboard with trembling hands. Bruce looked at the 5 of them. "What happened here stays here. Not because it's a secret, because it's personal. This was between Chuck and me, a private conversation." Everyone nodded, understanding without needing explanation. Bruce turned back to Chuck. "Tomorrow, we choreograph the Coliseum fight. For the cameras, for the audience. We'll make it look good. Dramatic. We'll make you look strong. Dangerous." Chuck shook his head. "I don't need you to make me look strong. I know that's why you're worth teaching." Over the next 3 days, between scheduled filming, Bruce taught Chuck what he'd learned during his years researching, experimenting, refining. Not Jeet Kune Do, not the system, the philosophy, the approach, the mindset. He taught Chuck that speed wasn't about how fast your hand moved. It was about how quickly you recognized opportunity. That power wasn't about how hard you hit. It was about hitting the right target at the right moment with the right angle. He taught him that the highest level of martial arts wasn't defeating your opponent. It was understanding them so completely that fighting became unnecessary. Chuck absorbed everything, took notes in a small leather journal, asked questions, demonstrated his understanding through adjusted movement. The crew noticed the change. Chuck moved differently on set, more efficient, more relaxed, more dangerous. When they filmed the fight sequence at the Coliseum, the one the world would eventually see, Chuck brought everything Bruce had taught him. He made Bruce look good, and Bruce made Chuck look like a legitimate threat. Because he was not the threat he'd been before Rome, the threat he was becoming. The movie released, the fight became legendary. Critics called it the greatest martial arts sequence ever filmed. Fluid, intense, realistic, 2 masters operating at the peak of their abilities. But the 5 crew members knew different. They'd seen the real thing. 90 seconds on a closed soundstage in Rome. No cameras, no choreography, no second takes. 20 years later, Chuck Norris would be teaching at his school in Los Angeles. A young student, cocky, talented, would ask him about Bruce Lee. "Did you ever really fight him? Or was it all just movie stuff?" Chuck would set down the focus mitt he was holding, look at the student. "We had a conversation once, lasted about 90 seconds. What'd you talk about?" Chuck would smile sad, grateful, everything I didn't know. The student would wait for more. Wouldn't get it. Chuck would pick up the mitt, continue teaching. But in his mind, he'd be back on that soundstage, feeling the heat, tasting the dust. Watching Bruce move like water, like light, like something fundamental that he'd spent his whole life trying to understand without realizing he didn't even know the question. Bruce died 1 year after Rome, 1973. 32 years old, gone before the world truly understood what he'd achieved, what he'd been building toward. But Chuck understood. And for the rest of his life, through movies, through teaching, through building his own schools and training thousands of students, he carried what Bruce had given him. Not techniques, not combinations, not secret moves, humility, the understanding the mastery isn't a destination, it's a direction. And the moment you think you've arrived is the moment you stop growing. Giuseppe never told anyone what he saw, but when he lit fight scenes for the rest of his career, he measured them against that 90s. Nothing ever compared. The two lighting technicians went back to Hong Kong. Occasionally, over tea, they would look at each other and shake their heads. No words needed. The production assistant became a director, made action films, cast Chuck in 3 of them. Never told Chuck that Rome was the reason. Chen became a stunt coordinator, worked with Bruce on Enter the Dragon, carried the stopwatch in his pocket for the rest of his life. Never used it, didn't need to. He'd already measured perfection. You've seen the movie, you've watched the fight. You've rewound it, slowed it down, tried to catch every move, every counter, every detail. You think you know what happened between Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris in Rome, but you weren't there for the 90s. The real ones. The ones that changed Chuck Norris forever. The ones that revealed the difference between being the best and understanding what best actually means. So here's the question. The one Chuck asks himself every time he teaches, every time he trains, every time he thinks back to that sweltering soundstage in 1972. When was the last time you were humbled by how much you don't know? When was the last time you bowed to someone not because you lost, but because they showed you the mountain is so much higher than you thought? And more importantly, what did you do after? Did you retreat into what you already knew, or did you climb? Because 90 seconds can change everything. If you're willing to listen, if you're willing to see, if you're willing to understand that real strength isn't proving you're the best, it's admitting you're still learning,